aboard Pink Monorail. I'm your pilot, Michelle Valladolid, and next to me is my co-pilot, Noe Valladolid.
Hey everybody.
This series is called Manufacturing the Magic, A History of the American Theme Park. On this episode, we're looking at seaside piers and boardwalk amusement parks. Another place for amusement parks would be found on many lakes and beaches in the USA, the amusement pier. Europe had their own, most notably Blackpool, which started out as a seaside resort, but really took off when it got electricity. It's quite popular today. In Atlantic City, Ocean Pier opened in 1891, Steel Pier in 1898. The boardwalk had a roundabout, a precursor to the Ferris wheel, like the ups and downs but with more people, in 1892. It was made of wood. Also in Asbury Park, New Jersey and Coney Island, they had amusement piers. Amusement piers were just as popular on the West Coast as the East Coast. There was Venice, Long Beach Pike, then later Pacific Ocean Park, a theme park built on the Santa Monica Pier. That whole pier is gone now, but there's a newer pier with Pacific Park today. WPGTalkRadio.com talks about Howard's Pier, which was the first amusement pier to be built over the ocean in 1882. It was built on Kentucky Avenue in Atlantic City. It featured vaudeville acts and concerts. The first boardwalk was also built in Atlantic City in 1870, shortly after the Civil War. It was 1 mile long. Now it is 4.8 miles long, the longest boardwalk in America. Disney's Boardwalk Resort is based on the turn-of-the-century Atlantic boardwalks. It was originally going to be a theme park, Disney's Boardwalk. When the site was being prepped, they had a big wall up, so you could go to the Yacht or Beach Club and rent a boat, sail right up, motor right up to that wall. And so I got a boat when I was staying at the Beach Club in 1992, and I motored up to the wall and then back a little bit to the center of the lake where no one could see. And I leaned back and I took off my I took off my top because the sides of the boat were high. And I heard a boat coming, so I pulled it back up, and it was a cast member just checking and make sure I wasn't dead.
You were just getting some sun.
I was just getting some sun.
So the people that are listening understand that you were just out there in the middle of the lake just getting some sun, minding your own business.
And he left, and then after a while of getting some sun, I heard a buzzing noise that kept getting louder and louder. Now, next to Crescent Lake is Epcot. Back then it was called Epcot Center. And they had a show on World Showcase Lagoon to celebrate the 20th anniversary of Walt Disney World called Surprise in the Skies. And it had characters, Disney characters, Mickey, Minnie, Donald, Goofy, etc., on flying machines that would come in and music would play and they would circle the World Showcase Lagoon. Then they'd fly off for a while and some show would take place. And then they'd come back and fly around the lagoon again for the finale. So this show was going on while I was sunbathing. So I hear this buzzing and I look up and I just open my eyes and directly above me is Minnie Mouse in a flying machine waving maniacally at me, waving so hard. And so I pulled up my top and I waved back, and the other characters came and they circled around Crescent Lake when they were off stage. Uh-huh. And so I got surrounded by characters in flying machines and waved at them all, and they all waved back, and then they went back and finished the show.
These were like ultralight glider type machines where they're sitting in like a bucket with 3 wheels. They were
pretty
like
much,
super small craft. Yeah.
Yeah. So I got a private show, and so did Minnie.
Okay.
But anyway, they had a big construction wall up, and it said, "Coming soon, Disney's Boardwalk." Now, there was a theme park called Boardwalk and Baseball nearby, and it was the former Circus World. They got rid of the animals and built a baseball stadium. ESPN hosted a trivia show from there before Disney bought them. There were just no match for Disney, and closed 3 years after the retheming in 1990. It's now a shopping center with big box stores. But Disney, they had a roller coaster, and it was called the Florida Hurricane. Then it was called the Roaring Tiger, and then because it was Michael Jackson's favorite roller coaster, it was named the Michael Jackson's Thriller Coaster. And Jim Hill, who knows quite a bit about this, sent me a picture of Michael Jackson and John Landis, the director of Thriller, riding in the front car of that coaster. Concept art revealed a coaster that looked very much like the Michael Jackson Thriller coaster. However, the project went from mini theme park for convention guests to resort pretty quickly, and now it was built as a resort. Disney's Boardwalk opened in 1996 for Walt Disney World's 25th anniversary. Alice and I stayed there in 2019 and really loved it. It smelled so nice. It did. It was designed by Robert A.M. Stern, who designed its sister hotels, Yacht Club and Beach Club, across Crescent Lake. It's a Disney Vacation Club resort and has restaurants, shops, a bar called Abracadabar. Can you guess the theme of it?
Is it a magic bar of some sort?
It is a magic bar. They have jelly rolls, dueling pianos, and Atlantic dance hall. Speaking of dance halls were as common on boardwalks and amusement piers as casinos were on land-based amusement parks. But back to Atlantic City and an immigrant named George Hamid Sr. from Lebanon. He spent his first night at Atlantic City sleeping homeless under the steel pier under construction, and this is from steelpier.com. He would later own it. The new pier was built in 1897 and opened in 1898 and was 1,000 feet long. It operates April through October, while the observation wheel there runs from March through December. In 1904, a wild storm washed part of it away, but it was repaired. In 1924, a fire damaged the pier. Frank Gravett bought the pier and refurbished it. The local paper called him the Saltwater Barnum. The pier hosted dance bands, 3 movie theaters, exhibits, operas, children's shows, a water circus, a stunt show, and other attractions. John Philip Sousa played a number of annual concerts. There was a World's Fair-like automobile exhibit. General Motors ran it from 1926 to 1933, when Ford took over and ran it from 1933 to 1947, when GM returned and ran it from 1947 until its closure in 1968. This exhibit was a precursor of Ford Wonder Rotunda, GM Futurama, and World of Motion at Epcot Center. There exist postcards of the outside of the exhibit. You can find them on eBay. The end of the exhibit was like the Trans Center at the end of World of Motion, showcasing shiny new cars. Cars at Epcot Center were the most photographed on property, more than Spaceship Earth or Cinderella Castle. Haddonfield United on Facebook has a picture of the inside as it was nearing the end of its run. From 1935 to 1938, the Steel Pier is where Miss America was crowned. It presented acts like Diving Horses and Rex the Wonder Dog, the Human Cannonball, a water-skiing dog, a diving bell, and acts from vaudeville to Frank Sinatra, Al Jolson, Diana Ross, and the Supremes in the Music Theater and the Marine Ballroom. In 1945, the young immigrant boy who had slept under the pier, George Hamid, bought the pier. He already owned the $1 Million Pier nearby. He brought in rock and roll acts like Bill Haley and the Comets and Bobby Rydell, who made 25,000 records about the pier, which sold for 25 cents each. The Beatles were scheduled to appear on the pier, not Los Beatles.
Not Los Beatles, the famous act that played a Tijuana nightclub one night when the Beatles were at Shea Stadium. But that's a story for another day.
The Beatles were scheduled to appear on the pier, but were so popular the show was moved to the Boardwalk Ballroom. The Ash Wednesday storm destroyed parts of the pier in 1962, and another fire in December 1969 shortened its size by about 1/5. Attendance went down in the 1970s, and the original wooden pier was destroyed by fire in 1982. The current concrete structure dates from 1993. It was turned into a straight-up amusement park. In June 2008, the pier celebrated its 100th anniversary. All rides were free for 24 hours from midnight June 18th to midnight June 19th. Donald Trump owned it for a few years and made it part of the Taj Mahal Casino. In 2011, it was sold to the Cantanoso family, who had been operating the amusement park under a lease for a few years. Trump tried and failed to close the pier and replace it with retail and condominium complex, just like his dad later did in Coney Island. Jeffrey Stanton has a fabulous page about Venice Amusement Pier out here in California. Amusement piers were popular on both coasts. After the Abbot Kinney Pier, which had been planned in 1904, built in 1905, wiped out by a storm and rebuilt, caught fire, a new pier was planned. The old pier featured attractions from the Portland, Oregon World's Fair. The main rule that came with the attractions was that they could not be used for profit. He started over with a ballroom, built in 1909. He went full scale with the amusement pier idea. He opened an aquarium, which had 48 glass tanks, a seal tank, and sea lion shows. In 1910, a scenic railway, so what we know as a roller coaster, was announced. Abbott Kinney added concessions, like a Denzel carousel, a Hades attraction, a Japanese tea house, and the Ocean Inn restaurant. And you can see all this on westland.net. In 1911, they added a Ferris wheel from the Seattle Yukon World's Fair, the automobile racer, and an old mill-style ride called the Rapids, which had 14-foot-long boats. A Virginia reel ride was added, where you rode in a barrel-shaped cars down a winding track. A parking lot and ostrich farm soon followed. Parking lots were big deals to amusement parks after the 1920s because of the advent of the automobile. It killed some parks, so building a parking lot was actually a big deal. A larger version of the Great American Horse Race Carousel opened. A horse race carousel is a carousel where the horses rock back and forth. After World War I, they added an indoor tunnel of love ride called Over the Falls, next to the quote-unquote Oriental Gardens. A new funhouse, Hilarity Hall, near the bowling alley, opened in 1920. The legendary Big Dipper coaster made its debut. A Mill Chutes hybrid ride was added nearby. Think Atlantis or Jurassic Park, Jurassic World, where you go through the dark ride in the boat, and then at the end there's a huge long chute that you go down. They added a theater and a Noah's Ark funhouse. On December 20th, it was all obliterated by a fire. First, they built a massive new dance hall. It had an oval orchestra pit and a dance floor 180 feet wide by 210 feet deep. It was decorated in a Spanish style. He bought a new Denzel carousel. I've mentioned Denzel a couple times. Knott's has one.
Oh, okay.
Beautiful hand carvings. They have kind of like clown or jester faces on some of them, and that's what they're known for. And the sign at Knott's next to the carousel has a separate jester face carving on it. They had a Bob's coaster, which is short for bobsleds. Know of any other coasters that have bobsleds?
I can think of the Matterhorn.
There you go. And this came from pbssocal.org. Venice was built with the rule that the beach could never be commercialized, so he built on the pier. After Dreamland at Coney Island, which we're going to talk about later, was destroyed by fire in 1911, Abbott Kinney built a replica of it on the Venice pier. The town was called Venice of America. Race Through the Clouds opened July 4th, 1911, the first racing coaster on the West Coast. For only 5 cents you could see Zaza Frizzell, the European sensation, who changed from a female into a male. You could ride Bump the Bumps, a giant wooden slide. Kinney leased pier space to Ernest Pickering, a successful amusement businessman. Venice's famous scenic railway ride soon followed, with built-in scenery of mountain terrain and tunnels, much like Big Thunder Mountain today.
And this is in 1911?
1911.
Oh, wow.
Big Thunder Mountain Railroad at Disneyland, but on a wooden coaster instead of Big Thunder's steel. Back to Westland.net. $500,000 of attractions were added in 1923, including a $200,000 funhouse that featured 25 different rooms and slides. Its entrance was a sister to Coney Island's Insanitarium, which we will talk about later, where women's skirts were blown up with jets of air and piles of rotating barrels looked ready to fall on them. Inside there were rotating rooms, slides, barrels, and a room of mirrors. There was also a mini roller coaster that only children could ride that surrounded the funhouse. That was included in admission to the funhouse. There were all sorts of rides and attractions for adults and children. In 1925, a plane ride opened, a high tower with arms holding planes that could flip and twirl. Now for the bad news. Los Angeles annexed Venice in 1925, shutting down drinking and gambling. The Great Depression slowed both business and expansion. Bingo was popular but considered gambling, so smart concessionaires invented bingo-like games of skill for people to play. The pier became popular with World War II troops, but stayed dark at night because of fear of attack. Do you remember in the movie 1941? They didn't turn off the lights of the amusement pier?
Right, and then the Ferris wheel got knocked off its things and went rolling
rolling into the ocean.
Yeah.
The Kinney Company, which had defaulted on bonds during the Great Depression, bounced back after the war and made $60,000 worth of repairs to the park. When it came time to renew the lease on the 25-year-old pier, things were bright and busy again, but the LA Parks and Recreation Department denied their request. They wanted to widen the beach and remove all non-man-made piers. LA leaders had hated the park ever since they annexed Venice. The pier closed at midnight on April 20th, 1946. Some of the rides were sold to other parks, but the buildings, roller coasters, slides, and more, including the flying circus, were sold for scrap metal and destroyed. It took a year to pull it all down. Then an arsonist finished the job. And now Venice, California is a paradise of natural beauty.
Everybody knows that.
Yeah, everybody knows that.
And a nice skate park.
Yay. Jeffrey Stanton's book, Venice, California, Coney Island of the Pacific, is hard to find, but it's a real treasure if you can find it. Also on westland.net is Jeffrey Stanton's Coney Island site. Meanwhile, in Long Beach, our stomping grounds, the Pike was founded in 1902 along the shoreline with a bunch of independent operators bunched together. It was most famous for the Cyclone Racer wooden coaster, which operated from 1930 to 1968. It was built on pilings over the water. The coaster, not the pier.
Right.
Not the boardwalk. It was renamed New Pike in the 1950s and Queen's Park in the 1960s to celebrate the arrival of the Queen Mary to Long Beach. In 1979, the Long Beach City Council, Boo, refused to renew the land leases and demolished all of the structures and attractions that couldn't be sold. The Pike Museum is located at Louv's Lidoline at 2500 Long Beach Boulevard. It started out as most seaside amusement parks did, with a bathhouse. It was called Wilmore back then. In 1888, Long Beach Land and Water Company bought Rancho Los Cerritos from the Wilmore family and renamed the resulting city Long Beach in 1892. In 1902, a grand bathhouse was built at the end of the red car trolley line in Long Beach near Pine Street. The grand opening of the Plunge coincided with the opening of the expansion of the Pacific Electric Railway, the red car, as seen in Who Framed Roger Rabbit and at Disney California Adventure. It took Long Beach residents to work and shopping in LA, and LA residents to the beach in Long Beach. The Long Beach Municipal Pier had 2 levels and a service building at the end. Pike was the name of a wooden boardwalk that connected Pine Street and the Plunge. It grew from a simple wooden boardwalk to a wide concrete boardwalk lined in electric lights. It was known as the Walk of 1,000 Lights, the midway in a literal sense, anchoring the attractions of the area. The Pike became the name for the entire amusement zone. Louvre made the carousel, and Lidoline, which was a game of skill, has some of the horses of the carousel. I've been there once. I don't really remember much of it, but I remember the carousel horses. Souvenir photography, Magruder saltwater taffy, pitch and skill games, pony rides, go-karts, a fortune teller, weight guesser, and some dark rides and thrill rides rounded out the early attractions. The Rainbow Pier was constructed to protect the new Long Beach Municipal Auditorium from erosion and was actually horseshoe-shaped. It was named Rainbow Pier because of its shape. In the late 1940s, Long Beach created Rainbow Lagoon and Wilmore Park. In 1954, there were 218 different amusements at the Pike, but after 1955, they faced stiff competition from a little park in Anaheim called Disneyland and from former roadside attraction Knott's Berry Farm. Pike already had a bit of a rough reputation because having no central owner, it was kind of a free-for-all. They began running ads, though, and coupons, and added a collection of carnival kiddie rides and a Bud Hurlbut miniature train, more on him later, and petting zoo. They had a contest and changed the name to New Pike, N-U-P-I-K-E. New restrooms were built out of concrete and cinder block. In 1969, they changed the name to Queen's Park, which was the formal name until its destruction in 1980, but everyone called it the Pike. When we went there in 1974, it was let's go to the Pike.
Let's go to the Pike.
Let's go to the Pike. Now for a creepy story. Elmer McCurdy. In the Laugh in the Dark ride, there were different mannequins in the ride to scare riders as they came around corners, etc. In 1976, the $6 Million Man was filming an episode on the Pike when a crew member spotted a mannequin in the corner and gave its arm a tug to move it. The arm came off, and it was very obviously not a mannequin arm, but a human one. He turned out to be Elmer McCurdy, who was shot to death by police in the early 20th century. He had no living relatives, so the undertaker let people put a nickel in McCurdy's mouth to see the corpse, as you do.
Yeah, this was the cowboy era.
A man who ran a carnival claimed McCurdy was his relative, so he took the body and put it on display. It made its way across carnivals and amusement piers until it was forgotten that he was a human mummy. The body was returned to Oklahoma at the end of all this, where it was buried.
Now, I remember watching a documentary about Mattel about He-Man and the Masters of the Universe.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the designers remembers going as a kid on the ride, and he says it smelled really, really funky in there.
Oh, really?
So, yeah, he says, first of all, it smelled really funky, but what really scared him were, like, the mannequins and the bodies and stuff. And he says, when I look back and I realized we were looking at an actual dead body, that sort of shock inspired the creation of Skeletor.
Really?
Yeah, so that's another layer of trivia. So not only did the $6 million man discover the body, it also had something to do with the development or the evolution of the He-Man villain, Skeletor.
That's really cool. The plunge had an indoor freshwater pool and was advertised as being regularly vacuumed in the days when vacuum cleaners weren't really a thing.
Mm-hmm.
There was an interior balcony facing the pool and an exterior one facing the beach with reclining couches. When it closed, it was converted to the Strand Theater. The large livery and stables was converted into a skating rink in 1906, then a dance hall in 1911, renamed the Majestic and featuring big bands. In the 1950s, it was sold and renamed the Lido Ballroom. My mom danced there. There were several theaters, including Lowe's, some independent theaters, and the huge Virginia Theater, which later became the Whispering River Dark Ride. The Strand offered double features. The Long Beach Municipal Band played in the band shell. The conductor, Herbert L. Clark, was a former member of John Philip Sousa's band. The Ocean Center building held the Hollywood on the Pike Cabaret and an arcade with shooting galleries, ball pitches, fortune teller, weight guessers, and coin-operated electromechanical games like pinball. They had skill prize merchandisers, penny pitch, etc. It was Long Beach's first arcade.
Oh, wonderful.
They had skee ball, redemption games, and then there was a place called Burt Grimm Tattoo, which we've actually been to.
Yeah, it's still there, isn't it?
Its American traditional tattoo style was invented by Ben Grimm. The place is now called Outer Limits, and our friend John Johnson worked there as a piercer.
Mm-hmm.
He's not there anymore, but the shop still is. It was started in 1927 as the oldest continuing business from the Pike, and also the oldest continuously operating tattoo parlor in the USA. Rides included Laugh, Laff in the Dark, which had 3 animated ballyhoo characters. A ballyhoo character is an early animated figure which usually rocked back and forth and laughs hysterically. A Laughing Sal, Laffing, Sal, ballyhoo character is in the background of the comic book store in the movie The Lost Boys from 1987. Sal was manufactured by the Philadelphia Toboggan Company. These guys again.
Yeah, so not only did they create rides, they created the early animatronics.
Exactly. And there are still several in existence. The Pike also had Laughing Sam and Blackie the Barber. The river ride started as an old mill attraction, then converted to a walkthrough called Voodoo Hut. They had a ride called the Spin Out, which was sold to Magic Mountain in 1979. They had Alpine, Wild Mares, aka Wild Bobs. The Lupa-plane had 2 16-foot arms. At one end, a compartment that holds 8 people. At the other end, a weight. A counterweight, yeah. Mm-hmm. The arms swing opposite each other until they loop, taking riders upside down. The updated version is called the Rolla-plane, and the Pike had one of those too. They had a loop trainer, aka a looper. They had a scrambler. They had the Loof Hippodrome with a carousel. When I first moved here in 2007, they had the roof of the carousel sitting on the ground. It was there from 1911 to 1943 at first, and then a 3-course open-air carousel started from 1944 to 1979. They had a Niagara barrel, a wooden spiral slide. Hooray! Horse Ride, which was a galloping horses back and forth. Space Capsule, aka Moon Rocket, aka Kittyland High Ride. They had an octopus. They had a Crazy Maisie, which was a house of mirrors. They had a Shooter, which was an indoor bumper car. Dodge'em, which was flat ride bumper car. They had a Funhouse, Tilt-A-Whirl, Super Trooper, which was an umbrella ride. Sharks Alive, which was a diving bell into a shark tank. They had a Kittyland with go-karts, the miniature train I mentioned earlier, a Ferris wheel, and a sky wheel. They had 2 wheels of 8 cars. They had an upper and lower wheels, and the whole thing revolved and turned at the same time.
Is that like the inner wheel on the Mickey's wheel in the...
No, this was 2 wheels, one on top of the other, and they each turned, and then the whole banana turned.
Right, like those circus acrobats that perform the stunts inside a similar shaped device.
Yes, very much like that. They had a Davy Jones Locker Dark Ride, and Loof, we're going back to Loof, Looff, who was a master carousel carver, and he installed the first successful carousel at Coney Island. His Santa Monica Pier Carousel in 1922 and Santa Cruz Beach Boardwalk Carousel from 1911 still stand and are operating. In 1911, Loof installed a carousel at the Pike and moved into the second story of the carousel building, which would later become Light-A-Line. Buster Keaton filmed a movie there, The High Sign, in 1921. The original horses were destroyed by a fire in 1943, and a new carousel was built outside, and Light-A-Line, a bingo pinball hybrid, took its place. It was the last remaining building to survive the 1979 demolition. The cupola was saved by Mike Sincola, who married into the Loof family and now runs Loof's Light-A-Line just down the street about a mile down. The rest of the roof I saw was dismantled. Coasters. They had a Bixby's Spiral Airship from 1902 to 1915. It had a very long climb, straight climb, and then spiral down. When I first moved here from Hawaii, I lived in Bixby Knolls. It is not named after this ride as far as I know. They had the Comet Junior from 1949 to 1959, aka the Jackrabbit Kiddie Coaster. They had the Cyclone, which is my first coaster. I was 7, it was 1974. I cried. It was not the Cyclone Racer.
Right.
Cyclone Racer was the queen. It was a racing coaster from 1930 to 1968, a Woody, and the pictures of it are just gorgeous. It made a figure 8 over the water. They had a Wild Mouse, or Swiss Bobs, which made of wood, 1959 to 1979. A Wild Mouse is like the Matterhorn or Goofy's Sky School. Bixby's was the first suspended coaster. In 1999, the California Coastal Commission approved the building of an outlet mall called the Pike Outlets, which bears no resemblance to its predecessor whatsoever. It's the same bunch of shops and restaurants you see in every city, nothing unique nor fabulous about it. The aquarium is the only good thing down there, except for a great Irish restaurant across from the convention center. Even their one ride, a Ferris wheel, sits between 2 two-story buildings and is dinky. The overpass from the expensive parking garage has a coaster metal artwork on it. It's pretty pathetic.
Yeah,
it's supposed to salute the Pike or something like that.
I think the original plan for that sculpture was actually to have an actual mechanical coaster cart that would travel on it, but they were worried it would make too much noise. So even a kinetic sculpture of a really cool coaster over the overpass over the streets was too much for the city council. I wish we had better city council members.
I do too. I wish we could go on longer, but we've reached the end of this ride.
Have we reached the end of this episode?
We have reached the end of this episode.
Oh, we learned a lot, Shelly.
Next time we're going to talk about Coney Island.
That's the one I'm waiting to hear about. Now, before we go, if people like this podcast, where can people find other articles from you?
They can find me at micechat.com, the happiest place in cyberspace, and at jimhillmedia.com.
Now, if somebody has questions about topics we've covered in this episode or previous episodes, where can they ask us questions, or even better yet, where can they support this podcast?
They can go to patreon.com/fab, F-A-B.
Excellent. And if anybody wants to find out more about, I mostly write about video games, but every now and then I do some Disney blogs as well. You can look me up. Just do a Google or a Bing search for The Street Writer, W-R-I-T-R, The Street Writer Podcast, and you should find my blog. And if you search for that on YouTube, you should also find some episodes that I've recorded independently. Well, I look forward to our trip to Coney Island, and I hope everybody that's listening has a great day. Bye, everybody. A special shout out to our sponsor, Circa 1955. Nicole is the founder of Luxillume, a small company that makes candles, wax melts, and room sprays. She creates scents that capture the season, nature, or wonderful memories. She also takes commissions for larger orders, such as weddings or company gifts. It turns out that Nicole is also a huge Disney fan and has a line called Circa 1955. She creates scents inspired by all things Disney. This includes the parks, attractions, treats, and films. She creates each formula and batch of candles herself. For every one scent she's released, she has probably made over 200 trials just to get the smell right. Don't take my word for it. Go to circa1955.com, order a candle, and use promo code PINK15. That's PINK15 to get 15% off your purchase. Support a small company that also gives back to the community. You're going to love it. Another shout out to Jim Hill for hosting Pink Monorail on his podcast network. The Jim Hill Podcast Network also includes Looking at Lucasfilm, The Disney Dish, I Want That, and Fine Tuning. Thanks for listening, and be sure to like, subscribe, and leave a review for each podcast. Have a great day.